Hey educators, it is Coach Asha and we are back. Today we're talking about the difference between independent schools and private schools. That may sound confusing, right? They're the same thing, right? It's a little confusing, but today's episode, we are gonna break it all down so it makes sense. We'll get into a little bit about the history and the mechanical differences that will impact how you navigate this system. So grab a cup of coffee, get your notebook out, and we're gonna get into the difference between independent schools and private schools. So let's start with the big picture. When people hear the term private school, they usually think of any school that's not run by the government. And that's technically true. Private schools are schools that don't receive government funding, and instead they rely on tuition, endowments, donations, and sometimes religious or outside organizations for their funding. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all private schools are independent schools. In fact, independent schools are just one type of private school. So all independent schools are private, but not all private schools are independent. Let's break it down. So let's take a look at what makes them different. Private schools can include all kinds of institutions. Some are parochial schools, which means they're affiliated with a religious organization, like Catholic schools or Lutheran schools. They're considered private because they don't get public funding, but they're not independent because they are tied to an outside organization, in this case, a church, okay? The same goes for private schools that might be run by a corporate entity or a nonprofit. They're private, but not independent. Independent schools, on the other hand, are private schools that aren't affiliated with any outside organization. No church, no corporation, no government, no nonprofit. That's why we call them independent, because they govern themselves. They're run by a board of trustees, and that makes that board empowered to make the decisions and how the school operates, from curriculum to hiring to school policies. That independence gives them a lot of freedom and thus gives us teachers a lot of freedom. So when you hear the term independent school, think self-governed, self-funded, and totally free to create a unique educational experience. This means independent schools can really focus on their specific mission and their values. Because they don't have to answer to any outside institution, it gives them more flexibility than other private schools. Let's talk a little bit more about what that looks like in practice. So, independent schools tend to have more flexibility in their curriculum and teaching philosophy. For example, they may offer a unique approach to learning. Maybe they focus on project-based learning, the arts, or specific educational philosophy, like Montessori. They don't have to stick to any state-mandated curriculum or standardized testing until they choose to. That gives teachers a lot more freedom to be creative and tailor their teaching to their students' needs instead of a test. Now, private schools that aren't independent, like parochial schools or corporate-run schools, may not have quite as much flexibility. They might follow the guidelines set by the church or the organization that governs them. For example, a Catholic school might have to follow certain religious teachings and include religious instruction as part of the curriculum. That's not a bad thing. Many families choose parochial schools because of that religious focus, but it's important to know that that makes them not independent. So one of the key differences you'll notice if you're thinking about teaching at an independent school is that you'll have to oftentimes say more about how you teach and what you teach. Independent schools pride themselves on giving teachers the room to innovate and create engaging learning experiences. If you're someone who loves experimenting with new teaching methods, or if you have a particular passion you want to bring into your classroom, or you want to do professional development around a certain topic and have the flexibility to create your own lesson plans, independent schools are a great fit for that. Another big difference between private and independent schools is governance. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth diving into a bit more. Independent schools are governed by a board of trustees, which is typically made up of community members, alumni, parents, and sometimes educators. The board is responsible for the long-term health and vision of the school. They make the big picture decisions, like how the school is run, what its mission and values are, and where its funding comes from. The governance structure is a big part of what makes independent schools so flexible. Since they're not tied to a church or corporation, the board is free to make decisions that align with the school's mission and the needs of its students. Contrast that with some private schools where decisions might be influenced by the governing organization's priorities, whether that's a religious institution or a corporate entity. Now, let's talk about one of the big questions I know is on your mind, which is better, independent schools or private schools? Here's my honest answer. It depends on what you're looking for as a teacher and what you value most in your work environment. Teaching at an independent school can be incredibly rewarding if you're looking for a place where you can have creative freedom and be part of a close-knit, self-governed community. You'll often have smaller class sizes, more flexibility in your teaching, and a strong sense of mission and purpose that runs through everything that the school does. On the flip side, if you're passionate about teaching within a certain religious or philosophical framework, or you like the idea of working for a school with a clearly defined structure or corporate support, a private school might be a better fit for you. Some private schools offer resources and connections that independent schools might not have, especially if they're backed by a larger organization. All right, so before we wrap up, let's quickly recap the key differences between private schools and independent schools. Number 1, governance. Independent schools are self-governed by a board of trustees, while private schools might be governed by a church, a corporation, or other organization. Number 2, funding. Both types of schools rely on tuition, donations, and endowments, but independent schools are fully self-funded without any ties to outside organizations. Number 3, curriculum. Independent schools have more flexibility in their curriculum and teaching methods, while private schools might need to follow certain guidelines set by their governing organization. And lastly, number 4, mission. Independent schools often have a strong, unique mission focused on their specific values, while private schools may follow the mission of their affiliated organization. So whether you're considering a career in independent schools or a private school, the most important thing is to find the environment that actually works for you. It's all about what aligns with your teaching philosophy, your personal values, and the kind of school community that you want to be a part of. And if you're still unsure or you want to learn more about working in independent schools specifically, hit that subscribe button so that we can talk more. If you're really serious about landing a job in an independent school, join my Spring 2025 Recruitment Waitlist. All the details are down below in the description. Until next time, keep being an amazing teacher, and I'll see you next time.